to showcase what this thing can do. This is a Tree Shear from Titan Attachments. Bought this thing on palletforks.com. It's supposed to have a 12-inch cutting capacity, but I think like for hardwoods and stuff, you're probably best off with like 6 to 8 inch maybe. It's got a 5-inch hydraulic ram on it that produces 30 tons of cutting force. My biggest complaints with this thing are the pins. You can kind of see this one got bent so bad that I can't even get it out, so I'm gonna have to cut it off. But I just left it in there because I actually just let this thing float. So you can set it in the horizontal position where it is right now, or you can flip it and hook it down to this pin here, and that's in the vertical position. So if you're cutting limbs, you would have it in vertical position. I actually let it float because I find it's easier to maneuver it when it can flex a little bit. So I actually leave the pin out of it and let it float. Some other complaints I have with this thing are the way the hydraulic hose is routed on this thing. It's kind of precarious. It sticks out a little bit. I wish they would have kind of run it through underneath and had it come out behind the screen. That would have been nice. I know that would make it more challenging for having it rotate, but that would definitely make it easier, because you'll see it gets pretty tight in the woods here. One thing that is also cool about this particular blade here is it's made out of AR400 steel, so it's pretty stout. I've been using this thing quite a lot. I mainly cut buckthorn and honeysuckle with it. There's a little wear on the blade, and I can sharpen it up with a grinder, but this, with being a tougher steel, it is harder to sharpen. So keep that in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is this guy is pretty dangerous. So you can see I've poked holes through the metal grate fencing here, because when you cut a limb, it can be very sharp and poke through things. Like, you can even break the metal there. I also had, I'm gonna move over here closer, this part of my skid steer cage I had a limb poke through here and bust out all the glass inside. So it's something to watch out for. I personally would not use this thing on a tractor in the woods, but that's just me. I'm a little more cautious. But you'll see when I get the action shots of this thing, it makes things fall all over the place, and you're bumping into stuff with your machine. And if you don't have a steel cage on your cab, you're gonna break your glass or do something eventually. The other thing, when you cut stumps, you can leave pretty sharp stumps behind. So I have tracks, so it's not a big deal for me, but like, come over here and I'll look at this stump right there. That's an old buckthorn that I cut probably a couple years ago. And if the blade is kind of tilted when you cut it, it can actually leave a sharp point. So something to keep in mind that you just need to watch out. And ideally you have a track machine for this kind of work, especially if you're going into a heavy mess like this. So let's do a cycle time test at full throttle. So this is going to be loud and the sound isn't going to be that good. So let's just rev this thing up to full throttle. One of my cons I mentioned is that it gets pretty clogged up in there, as you can see. So I just let it fill and clog. It does decrease the cutting performance, but I find it still works just fine. So not a huge con, but something to know. I'm just going to try to cut these guys up. Wanted to give you a view from the cab. Now ideally, one would have a metal Forestry door on the front, so you have a nice cage to protect your glass. So what I found though, I know I'll probably jinx myself if I say that, but I found that you usually have the arms up here when you're trimming this stuff anyway, and I take out the high stuff first, so it keeps things from hitting the glass on the front, because you got your arms out in front. Alright, so I think I can get over here to this big buckthorn. This guy is huge. I'm going to cut up here right below the crotch, because that's about the best I can tilt first. Don't want this to fall on my head here. This buckthorn here is taxing this shear. It's not wanting to cut all the way through. This is where I was saying I got this thing almost all the way back. Ooh, and there it goes. Now, let's take a look what we've got. So I just topped that buckthorn right there. And even though it fit, I'm guessing that thing's probably 8 inches, but it took several chomps to get it to finally come apart. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull down these big limbs, and then I'm going to leave that stump there, because that's a pretty good sized buckthorn that I'm going to save. I'm going to come back with the chainsaw and do that one. So this stuff is so nasty. I hate this stuff. So this is where you can really mess your windshield up. You're tipping it down and come right through the windshield. So I'm just going to bring this back, because this is how far I have to pull it. I'm now 20-30 feet from the stump, and it is still hung up. I'm probably 30 feet or 40 feet. So, as you can see, trying this with the chainsaw is not very ideal. So we're just going to cut this guy. Have a nice chunk of wood. And then what you can do, if you're bucking this stuff up for firewood, you just run along the tree like this. And I'm driving with one hand trying to hold this camera too, so this is not the best skid steer work that you'll see. So yeah, and that's all you do. You chop the stuff up, and it makes it a lot easier to pile up and burn. I'm just going to show you a quick reason why I leave the pin out when you have a tree like at an angle like this. And again, this is a manual tilt one, so if you had a hydraulic tilt, you wouldn't need to worry about this. But if you were to just cut right now and it was locked into place, it would cut through a lot bigger cross section of the tree because it's at an angle, and so you're not going to get a nice perpendicular cut on the tree. So by leaving the pin out, watch what happens when you turn the shear on here. So it'll rotate and it will cut perpendicular. And I found that what that does is it also alleviates a lot of stress that's put on the blade. When that big cylinder is pushing it, it puts a lot of stress. So if you've got at an angle or something, it will put a ton of stress on the attachment. And in fact, that's why my pin just bent. It didn't even have a chance. So it's because there's so much power in that cylinder that unless you're cutting perfectly perpendicular, you're probably going to bend your pin. So best just to leave them out, in my opinion.